The beloved priest, Pere Antoine. In 1763, Louisiana became a Spanish colony, and the Spanish Capuchin friars were sent in 1772 to replace the French. However, Fray Antonio de Sedella, the friar who would become known as Pere Antoine, did not arrive until around 1780. It is said that Pere Antoine kept a sparse residence in New Orleans and St. Anthony's Garden until his death in 1829, and there is archaeological evidence that he did. Pere Antoine was the priest in New Orleans who plays into many of the stories that shape our history. He both baptized and married Marie Laveau. He married Delphine to Dr. Lalaurie, and he married the first American governor of Louisiana, William C.C. Claiborne, to his third wife. He was supposedly sent to New Orleans as part of the Spanish Inquisition. In a 1919 appreciation piece for the Louisiana Historical Society, Clarence Wyatt Bispham writes, quote, "We first notice him in the stern and harsh garb of the attempted administrator of the Inquisition. No country in all the world was so bound hand and foot by the Inquisition as Spain. No city was more free from this heavy burden than New Orleans under French domination." Unquote. Pere Antoine is ultimately a controversial figure whose biography seemed to be clouded by the glow of a post-life halo perpetuated by the church's propaganda and the complicit journalists and tour guides who repeat it. But as always, the truth is much more interesting than the sanitized fiction. Bispham claims that there are three competing views of Pere Antoine. Number 1, a saintly and generous priest. Number 2, a controversial figure, to put it mildly, who may have been a criminal. And finally, number 3, quote, a scheming, adventurous, and dangerous man who must be carefully watched, unquote. He was born in Sedella, Spain in 1748 on November 18th and became a priest in 1771 in Granada. He came to New Orleans in 1780. In an 1878 article in the Times Democrat, he is described, quote, "He seems to have had a grand old face, long and yet massive in its length. If one might speak of the architecture of a face, I should say that his was Gothic, of the middle period. His snowy beard flowed down even to the hempen girdle at his waist, and together with his tonsure lent him the holy aspect of a medieval St. Anthony. His habit was of the coarsest brown material, and his naked feet were protected by wooden sandals," unquote. He was the priest who refused to ring the bells on Good Friday in 1788 when a fire broke out at the residence of Don Vicente Jose Nunez, the treasurer who was praying with candles near a curtain in unusual wind. The story goes that Pere Antoine insisted that Good Friday was a solemn day and bells should not be rung. Or perhaps it was impossible to ring the bells because they had been wrapped with cotton to prevent the inadvertent ringing due to high winds. Regardless, 80% of the city, including the cathedral, was destroyed. In 1790, he was exiled back to Spain for 5 years. Some older biographies point to sinful behavior of adultery and even murder as the reason for the beloved priest's exile. Richard Greenleaf claims it was for inquisitorial behavior that was polarizing the colony in his article, The Inquisition in Spanish Louisiana, 1762 through 1800. Greenleaf quotes Governor Miro, who wrote, quote, "These foreigners are imbued with and very frightened of the power of the Holy Office, which they consider absolutely despotic and discriminatory, notwithstanding the uprightness, stature, and circumspection of its most just proceedings," unquote. The construction of a new church, known today as Almanasser's Church, as he was the major patron, began in 1789. The city burned again in December 1794, but the new church was spared and dedicated as a cathedral on December 24th, 1794. After the fires, many people sought refuge in St. Anthony's Garden, where Pere Antoine had his shack, in temporary housing as so many people were homeless. But this housing was not free. Shannon Lee Doughty points out in Archaeological Investigations at St. Anthony's Garden, Volume 2, that there were rental fees attached to the temporary housing, which provided income for the church. Pere Antoine appealed his exile and ultimately returned to New Orleans in 1795. He was elected rector of the church at the beginning of the 19th century after the church attempted to remove his priestly authority. Very few of the modern biographies seem to include much of the controversy surrounding Pere Antoine's time in New Orleans or his exile from the city. He is honored by his nickname on Pere Antoine Alley. According to Catholic.com, quote, "Few priests have been more assailed by historians, but a careful comparison of the ancient records of the cathedral with the traditions that cluster about his memory show that he did not deserve, on the one hand, the indignities which historians heap upon him, nor the excessive honors with which tradition has crowned him. From the cathedral archives, it has been proven that he was simply an earnest priest, striving to do what he thought his duty amid many difficulties." Unquote. Pere Antoine died in 1829, and his funeral was apparently a huge display attracting people of all religions, races, and classes, who seemingly completely forgot about his initial Inquisition intentions. According to some, the newspapers requested the presence of Freemasons at his funeral, particularly the members of l'Étoile Polaire. Curious for a Catholic priest to earn such respect from the Masons, as Catholics are forbidden from joining to this day.